From Tuesday, July 30th to Thursday, August 1st, 2024, Richard Allen's three-day pretrial hearing occurred at the Carroll County Courthouse in Delphi, Indiana. At the hearing, the defendant's motion to suppress, the state's motion for admissibility, the defense's motion to suppress second statement, the state's objection to defendant's motion to suppress, the defendant's motion to vacate safekeeping order, state's motion in limine, defense's response to state's motion in limine, defendant's second motion to dismiss, and the state's response to defendant's second motion to dismiss were discussed. On the first day of the three-day hearing, Judge Francis Gull took into consideration if Richard Matthew Allen should stay at an Indiana Department of Correction facility or move to a county jail before trial. Sheriff Tony Liggett testified regarding vacating the safekeeping order. He said he was fine with Richard Allen moving from Wabash Valley Correctional Facility to Cass County Jail, one county away from Carroll County, as long as he is kept safe. Liggett said on the stand that he understood Cass County Sheriff Ed Schroeder was open to the idea. Liggett's concern was that if problems arose at the Cass County Jail and Allen became a problem, that he would be anxious about taking Richard Allen back to Carroll County because he said the jail was not equipped with a cell that could keep him out of the general jail population. In the second motion, state prosecutors and the defense team squabbled over how the 26 terabytes of evidence were organized and labeled. The defense claimed they had to go to Georgia, which Allen's defense attorney Andrew Baldwin said had cost him $12,000 to go there to acquire the photo above from a person named Ryan Boucher, which the defense said would prove Allen's innocence. The photo above was allegedly a picture the defense's third-party suspect posted onto Facebook showing a tree laying on two children. It's alleged Brad Holder posted it back in 2012, but he cannot remember posting it. The image to me looks just like a meme post, and it doesn't resemble the Delphi crime scene images in the slightest, and the stick formation and body posing is nothing like the tree branch and bodies in this meme post. State prosecutors said they never had that photo, and the evidence was labeled appropriately. Prosecutors said the defense team had the same evidence that they have, and that they're spoon-feeding them and doing their job for them. The defense also claimed their third-party suspect, Brad Holder of Logansport, Indiana, was not properly investigated and that his social media posts hinted that he practiced odinism. In the third-party suspect's deposition, the defense said that their suspect changed his story 3 times when asked about Abby Williams. Brad Holder's son, Logan Holder, was briefly dating Abigail Williams at the time of her murder. His phone was looked at, but the defense argued that Brad Holder's phone was not, and that the police either destroyed the suspect's phone records or didn't search the suspect's phone. In the deposition, the suspect said police took his phone but was not sure. The investigators claimed they never took the suspect's phone, but he was not a suspect in their point of view, and the state prosecutors said Brad Holder had been cleared very early in the investigation, as he had a clear alibi at the time of the murders. It was revealed that the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit report did not indicate that they believed the murder of Libby and Abby was a ritualistic killing, but believed it was an undoing, and that the killer was trying to conceal or hide or undo what he had done by covering the bodies with sticks. On day 2 of the pretrial hearing, Indiana State Police Detective Brian Harshman, who monitored calls Allen made from prison, testified that he noticed visible changes in Richard Allen's behavior in March 2023 when Richard Allen began saying that he had found God. Allen began confessing to his family in prison phone calls from Westville Correctional Facility in April 2023. He told his wife and his mother that he killed the girls. His wife and mother initially didn't believe him and later told him, "They're messing with you. They're messing with your mind." He then kept confessing in the months that followed. Detective Harshman said that Allen talked about why he killed the girls and why he delayed in confessing. Harshman did not elaborate or go into details on what the motivations were. Harshman also said Allen expressed fears that his family would no longer love him after the trial, during which they would see graphic photographs of the girls' bodies. It was also revealed that in November 2022, Richard Allen told his wife over the phone, "If this gets too much for you, just let me know, and I'll talk to the detectives and tell them everything they want to know." Detective Harshman said Allen had made at least 61 incriminating statements where he revealed information that only the killer would know. He made those incriminating statements to other inmates assigned as companion inmates while he was on suicide watch. He also made statements to prison guards, the warden at the Westville Correctional Facility, and the chaplain, where he was kept in a segregation unit and under constant video surveillance. It was also claimed by Harshman that he'd made nearly 100 statements confessing to the crime in some way or other, and that he had also made incriminating statements at the prison he moved to, the Wabash Valley Correctional Facility. It was claimed that all of the 60-plus incriminating statements coincided with a decline in Richard Allen's mental health. Allen had started eating his own feces, running the length of his cell and hitting his head against the door, and was washing his face in toilet water. Former Westville Correctional Facility warden John Gallipo, who was warden when Allen was there, testified that he heard Allen make a verbal confession through his cell, and he allegedly heard Allen name the girls in that statement. In a separate instance, the warden said Allen had given him a letter stating he wanted to confess, and the warden turned that letter over to internal affairs at the facility. Dr. Monica Walla, who is the lead psychologist at Westville, had therapy sessions with Allen and testified his mental health began to deteriorate in April 2023, around the time he began confessing. Allen started expressing suicidal thoughts and feelings of hopelessness. Allen was seen banging his head on the wall to the point that his face was severely bruised, Walla testified. He began eating his own feces. His thoughts were disjointed. During some sessions, Walla said Allen was trembling and his eyes were twitching. She also said Allen met the criteria of having a serious mental illness, a designation that would have placed a 30-day limit to his solitary confinement. Walla, however, also expressed doubts about Allen's honesty. ISP, Detective Harshman testified prison guards at Westville assigned to keep an eye on Allen when he was on suicide watch believed he was faking his mental health issues. Harshman said he had reviewed between 650 and 670 calls made by Richard Allen, which was around about 150 to 170 hours worth of phone calls. Harshman also said that investigators were looking into some of his daughter's friends because of some of the claims Richard Allen had told inmates through his incriminating statements. Prosecutor attorney Stacy Diener referred to Walla's notes in which she questioned whether Allen was purposefully behaving bizarrely. Walla acknowledged there were times she was not certain whether Allen was legitimately going through a mental health crisis or feigning psychotic behavior. Dr. Monica Walla had followed the Delphi case a year before Allen was arrested and followed the case more closely after Keegan Klein's name was brought up in connection to the case. She tried finding out details about Keegan Klein and used a case management system through her job to access information on him. She had access to his pre-sentencing report, which was full of all types of personal information about Keegan that wasn't intended for the public to view. She had also followed many pro-defense YouTubers and told Richard Allen that he had many followers supporting him who believed in his innocence. She told him to only speak to his lawyers. Dr. Monica Walla said that she found information about Richard Allen having major depressive disorder and dependent personality disorder from records from 2019. He has apparently suffered from depression and anxiety his whole life, which millions upon millions of people do suffer from. She prescribed him Haldol, which is an antipsychotic medication for people suffering from symptoms from mental health disorders, such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. I think psychiatry and psychology are soft sciences, and there's pseudoscientific elements to them. They both have their merits and are valuable to some extent, especially when it comes to child psychology. A brain scan might show if someone is depressed, but might not show if the person has psychiatric comorbidities. You could tell a psychiatrist you hear voices, but you could be lying, and you would still be diagnosed with something like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. You could go and tell a psychiatrist in another appointment you were just anxious, and you might be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. I think Rick Allen may have been suffering from acute psychosis, but psychosis doesn't stay at 10 strength for a month straight, and it does gradually improve with sleep. Rick Allen wouldn't have stayed in a period of complete psychosis for 1 month straight. He could have still been malingering and also suffered from psychosis. Dr. Monica Walla testified that normal Department of Corrections rules says someone with his mental health issues should only be in solitary for 30 days straight, but he was in solitary for 12 times that. It was claimed they got around those rules because he technically wasn't incarcerated and he was just in the Safekeeper program. She said other inmates were yelling at him to kill himself and that he was a baby killer. Allen told his family he felt like he was being mentally tortured. The prosecution said his mental health was properly treated and got better with medication. Indiana State Police Detective Brian Harshman, in his testimony, said Allen was being treated better than all the other inmates. The prosecution refuted the defense's claims that the inmates and prison guards were actors and had forced Allen to confess. Dr. Monica Wallace said she talked to Richard Allen about what his background was, and she said he was married, had 1 daughter, made good financial decisions. Rick was very proud of owning his own home. He owned 2 vehicles and worked at the CVS in Delphi. Allen's defense team argued that Allen had been coerced by prison guards to confess, but his confessions came after he found God in March 2023. How many people is needed to make someone confess? I just don't get their logic, and I think they're just spinning things to try to fit their narrative and change their strategy when Allen made all these incriminating statements after reading pages from Discovery. I bet Allen's attorneys wished Rick Allen had said nothing, because it has now become an uphill struggle for them and now they need to jump over more hurdles. I find their strategy quite predictable because I assumed they'd try to resort back to the mental health excuse if the Odinist guard coercion strategy didn't work. I think they've tried to blend together his mental health issues with the Odinist guard coercion strategy, and I think they've added too much complexity for a juror to believe what they're selling if the trial still occurs. At the start of day 2, Allen's defense withdrew their motion to suppress second statement that was filed on April 15th to throw out his second interview, which he made to Lieutenant Jerry Holman on October 26th, 2022. The biggest revelation from the second day of the pretrial hearing was when Indiana State Police Lieutenant Jerry Holman revealed that Richard Allen had told an inmate that he used a box cutter, which is a utility knife, that he had been issued at CVS to kill Libby and Abby. Lieutenant Jerry Holman went to check the dumpsters at the back of CVS years after the murders occurred, and the item was long gone and had been disposed of. On day 3 of the pretrial hearing, Judge Francis Gull agreed to remove the safekeeping order, and Richard Allen would be allowed to move from Wabash Valley Correctional Facility to a county jail, where he can stay until his trial. Allen was given back to the custody of the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. The Carroll County Sheriff would not say where he would be housed, but earlier in the week he said he talked with Cass County Sheriff's Office about housing him in Cass County. The defense's expert, Dr. Dawn Perlmutter, director of the Symbol Intelligence Group, who claims to be an expert in ritualistic crimes, testified that she strongly believed the supposed F blood mark on the tree was a rune, and the sticks on the girls' bodies represented a rune. She had looked at the crime scene photos, a presentation of Facebook posts from suspected Odinists, and said she thought the crime scene had all the characteristics of a textbook ritualistic murder. She pointed out the stick arrangements on the girls' bodies were Norse runes. She claimed, because of the way the girls' bodies were arranged, that they were killed in a small clearing in the woods, given Odinists' connection with nature. Dawn Perlmutter also claimed February 14th is a sun-up to sundown Odinistic ritual holiday. Valisblot, or Feast of Valley, is Valentine's Day in Norse mythology. The girls were murdered on February 13th and not on Valentine's Day. She also claimed that a ceremonial knife was used and supposedly claimed that the knife was serrated. Prosecutor Nick McClelland asked her would she change her mind on her theory if she found out the object used to kill the girls was a box cutter. Dawn Perlmutter responded and said no. He also asked her if she would change her mind if she found out Allen made a statement that the branches were there, and he tried to cover the bodies with them. Would that change your mind? Perlmutter said no. The prosecutor noted that Dawn Perlmutter was paid to testify and has no official blood splatter training. Prosecutor Nick McClelland also pointed out that Dawn Perlmutter made a court TV appearance on September 2023 and claimed the crime scene was a ritualistic murder before she'd had seen photos of the crime scene that the defense team were preparing for trial. He also questioned why Odinists, who Perlmutter placed among white supremacist groups, would pick two white girls to murder. Prosecutor Nick McClelland also asked Perlmutter if she would change her mind if Allen admitted the crime had sexually motivated intentions, but they ended up having to kill the victim. Perlmutter said it wouldn't. Dr. Dawn Perlmutter has been used in 3 other criminal cases and has been deemed a vexatious litigant after she had filed a long line of frivolous lawsuits in a battle over her late mother's estate. She also considered herself an expert on Antifa because she reads their texts. LaPorte County Sheriff's Office crime scene. Investigator Major Patrick Cicero, who is a bloodstain pattern expert, testified how the blood was found at the crime scene and how it explained how Libby and Abby were killed. He said that based on his analysis of the crime scene photos and documentation, Abby Williams was killed while lying down. He testified that Libby German had been cut 3 times in the neck and at some point after being cut was standing and eventually sat down based on the patterns of blood found. He believed the blood mark on the tree was from the side of her hand and her pinky finger. Abby didn't move after she was stabbed in the heart, and Cicero believes she was wearing Libby's sweatshirt and was closed when she died. Major Cicero testified that the position of Libby's body suggested that she'd been dragged by one arm about 7 to 8 feet to where the killer eventually left her. How Libby was positioned was more about how she'd been moved than some sort of staging. Crime scene investigator Major Patrick Cicero testified on day 3 of the pretrial hearing and said that he thought the mark on the tree looked like an upside-down L and that the mark was 3.4 x 7 inches, which showed signs of flow after the blood wound trickled down the tree. Major Patrick Cicero said that he ran tests to see how the mark got there and used his own blood drawn by an Indiana State Police phlebotomist to conduct the test. He testified that he attempted to recreate the mark on the tree using a stick and then using his fingers. Each time he found that he had to reapply the blood on the rough bark several times to come close to the same effect. He said a 5'4" female test subject was able to make a similar upside-down L mark with the base of her palm on her left hand, turning her pinky finger up to reach the back of the tree. Major Patrick Cicero said Libby had blood on her hands after being cut and would have been in a similar position. Prosecutor Nick McClelland asked Cicero if he'd seen any other incidents where killers tried to conceal a crime with sticks, and he said that he'd seen other incidents where killers had tried to conceal the crime with sticks. Defense attorney Jennifer Jones-Alger asked him if he thought it was odd that the sticks covered maybe 3% of the girls' bodies and had been arranged in certain ways. Cicero acknowledged that the killer might not have done a very good job of concealing the crime. Rick Allen's defense team brought Indiana State Trooper Kevin Murphy testified that he thought there was an undeniable connection between Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Elvis Fields, Johnny Messer, and Rod Abrams, who he believed were a part of a Vinlander or Odinist group. Murphy testified that Elvis Fields told him in early 2018 if traces of his spit were found on one of the girls, but if he could explain why, would he still be in trouble? Murphy said he was stunned when he heard Elvis tell him this and said he made a mistake that day with Elvis by not getting him back in the car, grabbing lunch with him, and finding out more information right away. Murphy said he immediately started to chase the lead and connect the dots between the men. Murphy said the working theory was based on the scene and timeline needed 2 or 3 people or possibly 5 or 6 to pull the crime off, and the Odinist theory seemed to make sense to him. Murphy testified that the 2 investigators he was working with FBI agent Greg Ferenczi, who passed away, and Rushville police investigator Todd Click investigated these men and looked through their social media accounts and found out they seemed to know things no one else would know unless they were involved in the murders or they were there. Allen's attorney Andrew Baldwin had him compare the crime scene photos with Facebook posts by one of the men they were investigating. Murphy held the photos in his hands and wept. Baldwin said to him, "That's hard for you?" And Murphy said, "It sucks," wiping his eyes. Former Rushville police officer Todd Click testified that he worked with Kevin Murphy investigating the Rushville persons of interest of the investigation. Todd Click gave his theory on the crime at the Monon High Bridge and said he thought Libby and Abby had met the son of Brad Holder, Logan Holder, who dated one of the victims, Abby Williams, and found themselves at an Odinist ritual at the bridge and made fun of it, which angered the Odinists. So they then decided to kill the girls. Prosecutor Nick McClelland asked Click if it was fair to say Click's belief was just a theory. Click said that he had uncovered no direct evidence to tie any of the Odinist persons of interest to the crime. McClelland argued Brad Holder had an alibi and that Brad had clocked out at work from Liberty Landfill in Buffalo, Indiana, about half an hour north of Delphi, and checked in at a fitness center in Logansport at 4:08 p.m. He said investigators had cleared him from being at the Monon High Bridge Trail when the girls were killed between 2:30 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. Prosecutor Nick McClelland pressed Kevin Murphy, and he said that the Odinist leads didn't land on hard evidence and admitted to the prosecutor that he'd once said he thought Elvis Fields and his sisters had been playing him. Brad Holder's ex-wife, Amber Holder, also testified for the defense that when the girls died, she had been married to Brad for a few months. She is an Odinist, and that Brad came from a very Christian family, and a few months after the marriage, he adopted the Odinist or Asatru religion. Amber Holder testified that the disagreement which Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall had in the woods about doing sacrifices that had put strain on their relationship was not about the Delphi murders, which was opposite to what Allen's defense attorneys put in their Franks motion when they claimed the disagreement was about Delphi. She also said that Brad Holder told her that Patrick Westfall had killed Libby and Abby and that she needed to keep her mouth shut. She said Brad Holder would get drunk and says things which may not have been true. Indiana State Police Detective David Vito testified claiming Keegan Kline and his father, Jerry Kline, better known as Tony Kline, could not be placed in Delphi and at the Monon High Bridge Trail on February 13, 2017, on the day the girls were murdered. He said that Keegan Kline was communicating with Liberty German through his Anthony Shots Catfish account. Vito said that it was also possible Tony Kline was also using the Anthony Shots account to communicate with Libby, and that he suspected him of looking at child sex abuse material. He said one of Keegan Kline's friends had appeared in a photograph with a firearm which was never recovered, and the firearm was a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber handgun, and that the unspent round at the murder scene was also a .40 caliber. Vito talked about the child sex abuse material which was connected to Keegan Kline, and that Keegan did not have an alibi for the day of the murders and kept changing his story. He said the investigators were able to prove Keegan Kline's phone was being used at his home on Canal Street in Peru, Indiana at the time of the murders, and his father's phone was also being used at the home at the time the murders occurred. Allen's attorney, Bradley Rosie, asked David Vito if he thought Tony Kline was involved in the murders, and Vito replied and said, yes. And Rosie brought up Tony Kline's violent history and his history of abuse towards women. Detective Vito said that on August 21, 2020, he interviewed Tony Kline, and that he was aware that he had a history of violence and had assaulted a child, shoving the boy's head on the toilet, and had pointed a gun at Keegan Kline's mother. Vito also revealed he had an interview with Keegan Kline at Grissom Air Force Base in 2022, and Keegan Kline told him the red Jeep story, which could not be proven and was untrue. The story Keegan told led Indiana State Police to search the Wabash River in Peru, Indiana, for 5 weeks from August to September 2022. Vito said they could not find any phone or knife Keegan said was thrown in the river. Vito said the searchers found lots of phones, but none of the phones were Keegan's. He said they checked traffic camera footage along the route by the river that Keegan told him he and his father took, and no red Jeep appeared on the footage. Attorney Rosie said that there was never any evidence to tie Keegan Kline to the murders of Libby and Abby. Detective Vito said that the investigators have not been able to prove that there was ever a connection between Rick Allen and the Klines, and that there was no digital evidence of a connection between them. Indiana State Police Sergeant Chris Cecil testified that new tests were being done on Libby German's phone, the one she used to record the man known as Bridge Guy, walking across the Monon High Bridge and telling her and Abby to go down the hill. Sergeant Cecil said technology is more advanced now than it was in 2019, the last time it was checked for data. He said the GPS on the video started across town by the high school, but it was just a lag and it immediately switched over to the bridge, so the location data was off. He said that the Bridge Guy video started at 2:13:51 seconds and ended at 2:14:35 seconds. He said her phone died after 4:30 a.m. Ron Logan was brought up briefly at the hearing, and all that was said about him was that he wore a similar jacket and that he had his home searched. I don't think there's a way out for Richard Allen. I don't think he will be found innocent with the 4 charges he faces. The defense have argued about the chain of custody of the unspent round. They also brought up that there's no time of death. I think what they want people to believe is that a yellow rope was used at the scene to hang Abby upside down from a tree and drain her of her blood to save for a future ritual. The girls were then taken from the scene and murdered. The girls were then returned to the scene overnight. The defense also wants people to believe that the girls were killed at the scene during this Odin ritual, which was orchestrated by Brad Holder despite him not being physically there. They want you to believe that the killers returned to the scene shortly after 4:30 a.m. on February 14th to turn on Libby's phone, let it connect to the tower, then turned back off and put in a shoe underneath one of the bodies. I don't believe there's ever been a murder where the killer has moved a body to a new location from where they were murdered and then taken back to the original murder location. It sounds absurd because it is. The cabin or shack theory also never made sense because of the locations, distances, and direction of the cabin and outbuildings from where the bodies were found. The owners of the outbuildings and the cabin said in no way, shape, or form were they used for the murders. So that theory is bunk. Some people have said that no ritual sacrifice murders have happened in America ever. The killers of 15-year-old Elise Poller, who was murdered in July 1995, lured her to a remote location and stabbed her to death as a sacrifice to Satan, believing that murdering her would improve their death metal playing. I think 1 or 2 murders which were ritual sacrifices in America doesn't really make it a thing, and something that you could really become an expert from. I think common sense and logic will prevail. If the Bridge Guy video was taken at 2:13 p.m. or around that time and can be proven with the metadata and witness accounts corroborating the law enforcement timeline, then it shouldn't be ignored. I know some people think the hat Bridge Guy is wearing is like a greenish beanie or knit hat. I don't agree, and I think it's just a brown fitted cap with a small bill, which they took from Allen's home. Bridge Guy looks nothing like Johnny Messer, who had like a sideburn beard look back in 2017. Brad Holder had a super thick beard on February 13th, 2017. Patrick Westfall is 6'5", and nobody described a man being that tall before the girls were kidnapped. Elvis Fields in pictures seems to be often clean-shaven with a smaller build width-wise than the man in the video. Richard Allen places himself there that day and originally told Conservation Officer Dan Doolin in 2017 that he passed 3 girls. I heard he told Dan Doolin that information either the day after the girls were found or on February 25th, 2017, but I've never been able to completely confirm that. I think the Hoosier Harvestor camera footage is not a clear recording, and the vehicle is seen on the camera at a distance. If the color of the vehicle seen in the recording matches Allen's, then putting everything together with all the information and the totality of the circumstantial evidence, then I can't really see how he can get off. Even without a direct DNA match, the totality of the circumstantial evidence will sink him along with his numerous confessions, revealing information in those confessions that only the killer could have known. The environment being in the damp woods with a river flowing would have played a problematic role for crime scene analysts to acquire DNA because of the higher chance of contamination. I don't think Eric Williams, one of the searchers who claimed he searched in the area where the girls were found, is being completely honest, or he was simply mistaken. I think the darkness of the evening played a factor considering where the girls were found. Allen's defense claimed that the two photos taken through Snapchat by Liberty German, one of Abigail Williams on the bridge and one of just a bridge with nobody on it, were not found on Liberty German's phone. The Snapchat photos, according to KS, who was a searcher, said those two photos were the last photos taken by Liberty German, which were posted from her Snapchat and was seen by KS at 2:07 p.m. Former Indiana State Police Sergeant Kim Riley was asked about the Snapchat photo of Abigail Williams, and he said because it's Snapchat, there is no timestamp on it, so they were not sure of the exact time. He said the investigators know that it was after the time that they were let off, but the exact time we do not have that. Brad Heath, who has helped bring positive attention to the case, told Gray Hughes investigates sometime, possibly in 2019, that he saw an older model car parked in or nearby the CPS building, but it seemed like he was confused about the day he saw that vehicle because he said he saw the vehicle on either Saturday or Sunday and did not mention Monday, February 13th, 2017, when the girls were murdered. He had been working near the Monon High Bridge doing pest control work. There was actually an older vehicle similar to what Betsy Blair described at the Monon High Bridge on February 13th, 2017, and the person who drove that has nothing to do with the crime and was never a person of interest or a suspect. In the Ron Logan search warrant affidavit written up by FBI agent Nicolay Robertson, who is known to pad affidavits and exaggerate information in order to get them signed off, stated in the warrant that the last successful ping of the cellular phone, Libby's phone, was at approximately 5:30 p.m. If the 4:33 a.m. ping is correct from Libby's phone, it could be explained by a phenomenon called cell phone breathing. When a phone is idle in low power, it can send out signals to try to maintain a connection to a network. This can include a signal to check in with nearby cell towers, sync data, or listen for incoming calls or messages. When it was about to switch off, it may have got a low-power periodic signal from a cell tower, and all the text messages may have come through to her phone when it pinged and shut off. In a previous response from the state, it claimed the defense were confused about pings, so I'm not quite sure if the defense understand what they're talking about. They seem to be confused about a lot of things. I think it's game over for Richard Allen. When you base something on a belief system and you try to fill in gaps because you don't have all the data, then you're likely going to be wrong. The Odinist angle of the investigation was obviously looked at as a possibility because it's good to be open-minded to an extent when you are still searching for the perpetrator to solve the case. Just because it was part of the investigation doesn't automatically mean it is the right direction. I think fan fiction was applied through the 136-page memorandum. I feel the Delphi community is similar to the ufology community. They want to believe a theory even if it's debunked or ludicrous, and you could peel their eyes back and show them a blue sky and they'd say it's an orange sky or something not blue. I said there was no Keegan-Klein connection to Allen, and I worked that out about a month after Allen's arrest after going through the technical aspect and using common sense. You can be a really smart, intelligent person, and that person can still lack common sense. Coincidences happen in many cases, and some cases have bigger coincidences than the Delphi case. I saw a lot of chirps in relation to Keegan, and he didn't bring Allen up once before Allen's arrest. I feel like the case is like a bad TV show at this point and needs to be canceled because it's turned into a huge circus. My opinion is Rick Allen is guilty, and I don't care if you think he's innocent. That's your opinion, and you're entitled to it. Just try to keep it civil and respect other people's opinions.